Welcome to another episode of Four Guys Talking About AI. I'm here with my good friends Greg Sterling, John Gerard, and Neil Polacek. Hey guys, how's it going?
Hi, Andy.
What's up, Andy?
Hey. All right, big stuff going on this week, as always in AI. Today's session, we're going to talk a little bit about a new application from Google called NotebookLM that we're going to discuss and kick around. We'll talk a little bit about how AI will affect employment. There's a new blog post by Vinod Khosla, who is a very well-known venture capitalist in Silicon Valley, who wrote an article about that. Organization and investment changes, lots of changes going on over at OpenAI. And we'll talk a little bit about how humans are training AI models and what's going on that front. So to lead off with, let's talk about NotebookLM. It's such an interesting platform. I spent a lot of time this week playing around with it. It sounds like Greg and Neil, you guys did also. What did you guys think?
NotebookLM's been around for like 6 or 8 months or something. And, it was sort of this place where you would compile URLs and documents, and you could put together using AI a kind of comprehensive report or a study guide. It's sort of ostensibly for students, but not entirely. And then they just added this voice feature.
I thought it was remarkable what it could do. I put in a 45-page slide deck, and it gave us a 9-minute podcast with two people stepping on each other like we do on this call all the time. And it was as real as anything I've heard that's been synthesized. Sent it to a variety of people. Most people had no idea it was not real people. And it followed the story. It followed what we had put in the deck. And one other thing I tried is my wife does a bunch of work for a nonprofit, and we put in the PDF of their annual report, which is essentially what nonprofits do. They do an annual report. And it was remarkable how well it did with that. So I don't know, and it's not perfect, and you can't change much, but for what we've seen so far, I thought it was remarkable.
Yeah, it turns any document that you upload to it into a podcast. So it deconstructs it, kicks it around in a conversational kind of way, so you can learn about what was covered in those documents that you uploaded. And you can upload multiple documents into this thing. So it's not just one document. And then it creates a podcast. A few interesting things from my perspective about this that I was thinking about was the quality of the voice is really interesting. Like you can actually hear the voice up against a microphone in the way and the breath that they take when they take their breaths, the inflection of their voice, all that stuff is really pretty mind-blowing. It's advanced.
Yeah.
So that in and of itself was very cool. The one thing that I had as I was playing around with it and I was listening to it, I was like, wow, this is really cool from a novelty perspective. But I was just wondering about, does this really have a business application? And if it does, I was kind of like going, what is the business application for this? And how would companies use this to be able to convey some complex information that they have in a 45-page report, like you said now?
I think it has a lot of applications for people who are hard of reading. They might not know the language. They may have eye issues. Some people learn better verbally from audio versus reading something. So I think there are applications everywhere of the benefits to an end user who can, digest a 45-page slide deck in a 9-minute conversation with two people who seem to know what they're talking about. So I think there are many applications. I don't know if they can make any money off of it, but there are lots of applications, I think.
It's such an interesting example of how pitch perfect a model can be when it has a lot of training material, right? The reason this sounds like the perfect sort of podcast banter is because there are so many podcasts out there with this kind of back and forth, and that lends itself to being great fodder. It's able to mimic very, very nicely because of the very large pool of data to train on. So, and then, I question also, as I think you guys have, like, what do you do with this? Like, what's the model here from a business standpoint? I mean, I think at some level, a lot of this sort of AI generated everything, including podcasts, actually might turn into a flight to quality and a flight to personality, right? So it may be that what this does is actually cause people to lean more on the Dax Shepards and the God forbid the Joe Rogans and the four guys talking about AI, real people, you know what I mean, who sort of develop real personalities and real brands, because there's all the slop, right? The AI slop, and there's sort of people maybe recognize it, sort of feel like, God, this isn't quite right, and then there's a flight to personality and to quality.
Let me say something that supports what Neil is saying. I think, this version of what we're describing, these two voices and the sort of podcast style, I saw it more as like an NPR segment than a podcast per se. But regardless, I think that has limited applications. It's totally amazing. All the things that you guys are saying, I totally agree with. It's the most advanced voice that I've heard. I mean, in some sense, it's better than the OpenAI voices that were just released. But this would have to be modified for business use cases. This particular kind of banter that they do wouldn't work for a lot of things, but there's no reason why you couldn't take one person, two people. I mean, every article now that you see on major news publications has an accessibility line, read this for me, and those are all AI generated voices. And very often that's a better way to consume the information than to try and read the story on a small screen. So I agree with Neil that taking in information auditorily is really useful in some situations. And so there's that piece of it. And maybe there's a sales application. I don't know. Maybe there's some sort of outbound sales dimension to this. So I think the technology is very promising. I do question how useful the Google NotebookLM particular application is.
I would think that they're going to also roll out something like a panel discussion. I mean, you could easily take that instead of two people having a dialogue. You could have a moderator with a couple panelists talking through the same exact stuff, but asking questions and having responses. Again, would be very interesting. And I don't listen to that many podcasts. I know a lot of people who do it all day long. So, you're giving them the material in the format that they like. So,
I was thinking that, you could take that on the audio and create video B-roll of whatever it is that they're talking about and help tell the story visually at the same time. So use the audio as seed content and then overlay whatever it is that they're talking about with visual content that helps to tell that story, in which case that becomes a really potentially interesting, useful YouTube video, for example.
I think from an education standpoint, this is very valuable, right? What you're saying, Andy, the voice treatment of the material, I think it's very, very valuable for people trying to learn about a topic. And so, or perhaps training as well in a corporate context. So there's a lot of potential applications. This technology Google will use in a variety of ways, I'm sure, the underlying technology. NotebookLM may be one of those projects that eventually goes to the Google graveyard because, there's no money associated with it right now. I mean, they could throw ads into it or something, but Google will basically abandon things that aren't making them money or that aren't strategic in some way. And this may just be a demonstration of capabilities at this point. And a year from now or 2 years from now, we may see them shutter this because it just doesn't have enough adoption. And they tend to not promote things, right? They roll things out. Maybe there's a splashy initial announcement or blog post, and then there's little or no follow-up. And if things don't get organic adoption and, have some pretty strong growth, they're eventually cut loose. The underlying technology, I think, is really exciting. I don't know whether NotebookLM survives, but I think it has a lot of good educational and maybe training applications. But, we'll see. We'll see what happens.
Certainly fun to play with.
For sure.
It totally happens with Google too. They definitely sunset, lab experiments like this. So we'll just see what happens. A lot of fun to experiment with, though. You're right, Neil. It's it's pretty cool to upload a document to it and then 5 minutes later have a 9-minute podcast episode about it.
And then share with people who think it's live voices, real people.
Yeah. I love that education angle, actually, by the way. That's very compelling. I mean, I feel like that is the primary use case for me for most of this AI stuff is education. Like I'm learning stuff, and that's very, very compelling.
Yeah. Well, you can upload all kinds of documents to it. You can upload transcripts from calls that you've had, sales calls that you've had, or what have you, and have it run its podcast on those. So tons of applications there. Let's move on to the next topic here. So there was an interesting blog from Vinod Khosla, who is a venture capitalist, who was talking about how a significant portion of jobs will be taken by AI. He believes that the shift will lead to increased productivity and potentially shorter work weeks, but also warns that job displacement is imminent and will happen.
These are the big questions, right? So do we have a techno utopia or a techno dystopia that comes out of this? And right now seem to be the only options. If you believe the thought leaders on this, like these are the extremes and we're not going to get anything in the middle. Now, as always, the result tends to be some sort of a blend somewhere in between. But look, it's a really big question. And I think on the one hand, this has always been the big question with technology. This is why the Luddites did the things that they did, because they were afraid that technology was going to replace everybody and destroy everything. And we now use the term Luddites as sort of poking fun at people who think technology is going to make problems for all of us. And every time there has been a new technology and a new innovation, and there's been this hand-wringing and these fears, there's always a group of people who are afraid, who say, well, this time it's different. And we need to be careful because this time it's different. And we have also laughed those people out of the room historically. And I guess the big question is it actually different this time? This feels at least somewhat different than other technology revolutions in our lifetimes. But who knows? Maybe this is what the internet felt like to me 20 years ago. Vinod Khosla's thing is dystopian. There's too much displacement, wealth concentration. Only the very, very wealthy sort of accumulate everything. I think it's a real thing that we're going to need to see economists and technologists debate and try to make sense of.
It's going to be really interesting when the jobs report changes how the market reacts to what's going on in the economy, because right now so much is weighted on the jobs report. And when jobs start changing because of this kind of dynamic, there's going to have to be some sort of adjustment in expectations of what's going on with jobs. And there's going to have to be some kind of answer to this from a government standpoint in the WPA kind of way, or something to keep people employed and start, continue building infrastructure. So,
well, it's the phasing of it too. It's how fast it happens,
right.
Because that will really dictate how quickly the government does anything about it, I think.
But I question whether or not the government can do much about it. I mean, you can do things, you can regulate AI to a degree around privacy or around safety, content moderation to some degree.
When I said the government, I was thinking about the other side of the equation. Like, what do they do? Do they have a WPA model? How do you put these people, employ them? Not much about what they do to regulate it.
That assumes that there will be this sort of massive set of job losses. And I'm unwilling at this point to predict with confidence what's going to happen. I mean, certainly there will be some job displacement. Will it be as extraordinary as Close is saying? Probably not. Will it be exactly as people have predicted? Probably not. I mean, I think there's some subtlety here that we can't predict. We're hearing in some of our conversations with small businesses and with larger entities that there is some changes in how people are thinking about hiring in the future. There will be some impact on hiring, and maybe some people who leave organizations won't be replaced because AI tools can empower somebody to do the work that they were doing before.
Yeah. On that point, Greg, I just read something about a London newspaper. They're going to revive this art critic who died in 2015 at 84. They're going to revive his byline with AI and layoff reporters. So it's happening in a lot of places, small little things.
Job displacement, in fact, sort of the large job displacement, has also been a feature of every technology revolution that's ever happened. And, the question is, does it do the thing it's always done historically, which is like, oh my God, the world is ending. This displacement is crazy. And then like, oh wait, look, everything's okay. We found different jobs for these people. For instance, that's Mark Andreessen's position, is that, the laws of economics are not disrupted by this disruption. They're still in place. And historically, what that has meant is that all the hand wringing about nobody's going to have any jobs has been, for naught, because different kinds of jobs become available, right? Just based on sort of pure economic pressures.
This gets into a lot of complicated economics, which are beyond my pay grade, as people say. But, in a capitalist economy, the imperatives are to generate as much profit as you can at the, as much revenue as you can at the lowest cost, which is, where the profit comes from. And so, we've seen outsourcing from higher cost labor markets to lower cost labor markets. There was a huge wave of that stuff. Manufacturing has largely done the same thing, right? And there have been real job losses in manufacturing sectors where things used to be made in the United States and they're not anymore. And that's a big political issue. And, it's playing out even in this election with all the talk about tariffs and this, that, and the other. So there's a kind of inexorable logic to the way the economy works and the way that people think, the structural incentives in the economy, such that everybody is going to try and move as much as they can to a lower cost structure. And AI will be instrumental in that for a lot of people. And some of that will result in fewer hires or layoffs. That to me is the disturbing thing. There's a kind of bloodlessness in all of that. There's just a logic there, market logic, which is without compassion or empathy. It's just make as much money at the lowest cost as you can, and you are rewarded. That's the way that the stock market works for public companies, and that's to some degree the way that the private markets work. And so, an AI will be an instrument of that logic, I think, ultimately.
Tying that with this note we saw about how companies are essentially firing the interns they just hired, the Gen Z interns, because they don't show up, they're lazy, they're disrespectful, they're a whole bucket of characteristics. And what I took away from that is that AI is their replacement. Because most interns who join a company, big or small, law firm, any kind of thing, they're doing essentially task work, grunt work. That's what AI is going to be first to replace. And so they're shooting themselves in the foot already by having this sort of attitudinal issue, and they're going to find themselves unable to find jobs down the road potentially. And that's a bigger issue, frankly, in my mind, about the attitudinal stuff. That's got to get fixed quickly. And if I were sitting on a college campus and in job placement, I'd be training these kids on AI and how to sort of respect the bosses above them and how to show up on time and basic stuff that I can't believe isn't going on today. I mean,
I want to defend Gen Z a little bit here. So the article that you're referencing, Neil, was based on a survey of bosses, for lack of a better way to put it, who are expressing frustration with the work ethic of recent college graduate hires and a sort of reluctance to hire
in the future.
Gen Z. Yeah. So the finding here is that 21% of hiring managers report recent college graduates can't manage the workload. Plus, they have other characteristics that are undesirable about timeliness and professionalism. To some degree, we're talking about a generation gap here. The bosses tend to be older. This is not true in every case. The bosses tend to be older, generationally speaking. They're going to be older for sure, regardless, but generationally. And there's a certain kind of culture clash going on, and this has been widely reported in the past. It's not everybody. There's a lot of stereotyping. I don't think that's fair for a lot of people in Gen Z. I mean, I have two kids who are arguably in that category. They're both very responsible. One daughter is working as a sales rep for a big software company in San Francisco. My other daughter's in college. Both very responsible kids. They're certainly not in that category, and they have a lot of friends who aren't. So I think there's some stereotyping, there's some generational discomfort, and some of this is true. But to the extent that the perception is out there, that will make it true. And I think, Neil, your point is right, that people will often seek to do something with a piece of technology so they can save the cost of the human, and they don't have to deal with the hassle and discomfort of dealing with somebody who gives them attitude or whatever, that there's something they don't like, right? Isn't compliant in the same way that older workers have been compliant historically.
The job protecting aspect of that in some cases too. So you're going to have some of these kids go to these jobs who know a lot about AI and workflow automation, and they're going to bring these ideas to their bosses. And some of those people are going to be threatened because they're going to say, whoa, you're going to automate me out of my job. I don't know about this kid. Hit the road.
And then that kid's going to go and create a competitor that destroys the company.
Exactly.
Create a SaaS insurgent that will undermine that company.
I honestly wonder, part of this sounds a little bit to me like the exact same headline that ran 20 years ago, and presumably the same headline that ran
Millennials.
in 1980, and presumably the same headline that ran in 1969, in San Francisco. Here would be my thing. How do we know that data is meaningful? Like, how do we know that, like, it wasn't actually 40% of bosses 5 years ago or 10 years ago that were concerned with recent college graduates, and it's actually gotten better? Like, I think this is, and I'm not suggesting that's actually the case, but I think that this is a really nice piece that plays very much into cultural stereotypes, and may not have a lot of, real substance to it.
But Neil's point, I think, is valid. Now you have this tool that can do those jobs where in the past you didn't. You had to sort of deal with the human. Now you can just say, take a hike. I'm going to just have this tool do it.
If you're the boss who hired these people, you don't know how to use AI to, do what you're saying, Greg, then you're kind of...
Somebody in your company has to know how to do AI.
Somebody, but maybe, I don't know. There's a lot of... That's why there's so much opportunity for companies who are focused on automation or focused on utilizing AI to help these businesses level up their game or modernize the way that they're executing for their clients. A lot of that doesn't happen right now because it's uncomfortable to do new things, or people it's not culturally in their DNA to do those kinds of things. So
a lot of companies could hire older workers, right? There's the flip side of this is there's a lot of older workers out there that need work, or people who don't have enough money for retirement and need to work, and they're not being hired because of ageism, right? There's rampant ageism in these companies. So you don't want to hire young people because they have too much attitude and they don't show up on time. And you don't want to hire old people because you have a bunch of stereotypes about them and their capacity to do new things and do work and, whatever. And so it's just a kind of a self-destructive set of attitudes, I think, among these companies, on some level.
And it is, I guess I will, for sure say, like, this is the narrative, and actually narrative has power, and to the degree that it becomes self-fulfilling and displaces these college grads, and they suddenly go, well, okay, I guess I got to do this on my own. Now, again, maybe what we're really doing is breeding the next, generation of super villains who are going to disrupt all industry because, they couldn't actually find the internships.
Super villains are entrepreneurs, by the way.
They are. I was thinking specifically of Elon Musk when I said that.
He falls into that category.
Lots of organizational and investment changes this week. Let's talk with about top of the pack here with OpenAI. A lot of changes going on over there. They're considering a restructuring for profit. It sounds like they're going to be doing that
for sure.
They had several executives leave this week. CTO Mira Murati is, first out of the door on that. But lots of other executives left as well. Big restructuring going on over there. And, what are you guys' thoughts around what's going on there?
So my one concern, I don't care if they're for profit or nonprofit, although if they're for profit, then, they'll go public. And then there's all the sort of distorted incentives that I was talking about before. The thing that I'm concerned about is that OpenAI losing all this talent may lose momentum. There may be some disruption of their capacity to deliver new releases and keep the momentum up. And I think it's really important that they do that, because otherwise Google will move back into the sort of pole position and kind of own this, I think. And I think it's very important to have competition and counterweights to Google. I mean, Microsoft certainly, and to some degree Facebook, But really, it's OpenAI that's kind of the has been the disruptor, and I think I would be sad to see them lose that position. I mean, many people won't be sad if that happens, but
Okay.
I think it's healthy for the market, and I'm concerned about loss of momentum based on the brain drain.
And presumably the move to for-profit is actually partly a strategy to solve that, because now all of a sudden you have shares that you can give to people that have, potential very significant market value that draws, because that's the way everybody else is competing, right? With outsized, packages and upside for people. So now they can sort of, level the playing field in terms of the fight for talent. It certainly doesn't benefit them in many other ways. I mean, if switching from nonprofit to for-profit is not going to make them profitable, right? Like they're wildly unprofitable and will be, so for a long time. Presumably it opens up, like you said, through going public, other ways that they can actually finance their massive losses for a while and help start winning the talent war a little bit more effectively.
Greg, I think your point on not losing momentum is a really salient one. I think they said in their last statement that they've got a million developers using their API now. There's a huge number of people that are building products and services around that platform. So, by the way, as a developer on their platform goes up and down quite a bit. So, they're going to need to really, step up their game and continue with the momentum that they've had. Which, by the way, they released this really cool version of their voice application this week. That's pretty incredible. And if you ever did want to test it out, a really interesting way to do that is to on the mobile app, on the OpenAI mobile app, you can go to the voice, click the headphones icon, and it'll go into voice mode. And you can ask it, tell me what you know about me. Start with that. And it'll tell me about dossier about me. And you'll be surprised at how much information after using it for a while that they know about you. So from a personalization standpoint and where this goes, and with all the agentic AI that's about to happen here, keeping at the forefront of that in the midst of this brain drain kind of situation is going to be a complex one to navigate. All right, well, let's move on to the next topic here. Humans behind AI. So there's a company called Scale.ai that's been in business for the past 12 years or so. A really interesting company. What they do is that they build a team around AI businesses or lots of other businesses. Meta uses them and Google uses them for moderating user-generated content forums and making sure that people who are saying inappropriate things or maybe violent things or what have you, that those posts get taken down to keep those marketplaces clean. That was one use case of Scale AI. But what they've done is that they've evolved into this platform of people who train the AI models. And it's really interesting to think about how humans are training the AI that then have all the implications and value that AI can create.
This is people being paid to train their replacements, and again, there's a long and storied history of that as well. But yeah, it's hard to see how the humans win on that one. I don't know. I know that this happened a lot in the early training of a lot of the LLMs, and there are very large workforces spun up, especially overseas, that did all their work and then they went away as soon as the model was trained.
Well, and we've been training our replacements for years in the real world. I mean, we're just training something different here. We're training a machine instead of another person that will take many years to take my job. Can it really do all the stuff I do? Can it really be personable and all that stuff? It can do the spreadsheet. I can train it to do this spreadsheet. Can I train it to be authentic when I'm talking to a person? I don't know if I can do that.
You train it to drive a car.
Oh yeah, totally. I mean, in 10 years, all of the Uber drivers will be gone. It's all going to be autonomous. But my take on this is a little bit different. I was sort of focused on the humans behind the magic kind of angle, which, people think, oh, this technology is so magical. And the companies always present these things as completely, it's a black box. It just works. And there's a mysterious things happening inside. More often than not, there are a bunch of humans, and there's a lot of heavy lifting, and there's a lot of manual work that has either set up the foundation or on some ongoing basis are involved. We talked in the green room about Google a little bit. Google still relies very much on humans, click data, quality raters to inform its algorithm. It's not all the machine. It's not all sophisticated technology. And, it reminds me of the video on demand that I think one of the cable channels did, maybe in the early 80s, where they actually had people in New York putting cassettes into machines as they were being requested. I mean, this was sort of the early version of that. And eventually technology took over. And of course, now, we have streaming. But this is the story always. There's a bunch of humans involved doing a lot of grunt work, doing the difficult work to get these machines up and running. And then eventually, they work. And that's a story that's not well known, and often these people are exploited, paid low wages, and are exposed to sort of horrific stuff, depending on what the situation is.
The thing with Scale AI that I find fascinating is that in addition to them being a billion-dollar valuation business, being largely human-powered, the other part about that is that they employ these teams that are purpose-built to go away, right? Kind of diametrically opposed forces,
the better
right?
you do your job in that role, the faster you make yourself relevant.
Right. And stay a billion-dollar business. So it's pretty incredible to have that kind of valuation and have the seat at the table with these companies that they do. It just goes to show that, the demand for these kinds of services, like what you're saying, Greg, is so high.
It's very hard to do, right? The sort of hard spade work, manual work that's often behind these systems is very, very hard. The people that can put together the infrastructure that can do that, can make a lot of money, at least for a brief time.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's wrap it up for this week. Interesting conversations going on here. We will be back next week with a whole slew of new stories going on in the AI space.
As always.
Thanks for listening.